Hi everyone, we've come to the end of Asia Pacific Week 2021. The committee and I hope that you've thrown yourself into everything APW has to offer, have broadened your perspective through our panels, and have met like-minded individuals from all over the world through our virtual events. Our closing ceremony will feature our keynote speaker, Senator for the Greens Mehreen Faruqi, our post-conference wrap-up video, a special performance made for us by the ANU KPOP Society, and our delegate talent showcase. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to close this year's Asia Pacific Week. I commend ANU for hosting this conference. It is so important that we continue to engage in meaningful discussions on the major forces at work in our region, from the movement of migrant labor to our health and environment. The theme of this year's conference, Unveiling Layers of Crises, Learning from the Past, Reimagining the Future, invited us to reflect on a year of the COVID-19 crisis, but also a year of climate disaster, resource shortages, and border closures. This evening, I'd like to particularly explore the role of borders in the COVID-19 crisis and take the opportunity to interrogate international borders as barriers to global justice. First, we must acknowledge the colonial oppression experienced by First Nations people here in Australia at the hands of imperialist forces for over 230 years, and the continued violence they experience at the hands of the state. I acknowledge that I'm speaking from Gadigal land tonight. We live and work on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded. This is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Despite First Nations people living on this continent for over 60,000 years, colonizers stole their land, their water, their children, all in the pursuit of colonial economic and political project. This exploitation of First Nations peoples is also seen in the treatment of our Pacific neighbors, whose countries were invaded and bought, sold, and traded throughout the 19th century by European powers, with no consideration or self-determination for local communities. The Pacific remains a space where competing imperial interests, including the US, Japan, Europe, Australia, and increasingly China, vie for resources and power. While most islands of the Pacific have gained their independence, Australia continues to assert its dominance over Pacific nations through trade deals and visa conditions. Australian mining companies have plundered and profited enormously from the region, exploiting local labor and destroying the environment in ways that are not legal in Australia. Australia's seasonal labor programs abuse Pacific workers through precarious work uncoupled from any possibility of citizenship. These programs allow laborers into the country, but only to boost corporate profits and keep wages low. They force Pacific workers to come into Australia to do the work that we do not want to do, for low wages that Australians would not accept. The oppression of the global South by the global North is the underlying crisis that animates many of the global injustices we face, from wars to the fallout of the climate crisis and the pandemic. It plays out in our brutal refugee policies, in the exploitation of migrant workers, in the refusal of Western nations to support vaccine patent waivers. This oppression is not by accident. It is motivated by racism and the greed of capitalism and maintained by nationalism, border regimes, and militarism. The COVID-19 shutdown has highlighted the harsh reality of borders for all of us. Travel restrictions and national lockdowns have prevented the global movement many of us in the global north have become so accustomed to. Mobility is not something that can be taken for granted, even for those of us in wealthy Western countries. When I visited my daughter and mum in the US in 2019, I didn't know it might be the last time for years. Every parent tells their family that if you call, I'll be there. We promise to get on the first plane if it comes to that. Right now, I can't make that promise. Every day, my heart breaks on the phone when my mum says, I don't want to die without seeing you again. I know that for most of the world, restrictions on movement and the sorrow they cause are not new. Strict border policies have been separating families since the advent of colonialism. In Australia, this violence is clearest in our treatment of refugees. Under capitalism, people are allowed to cross Australian borders, but only on the terms of the corporate and political elite. Here's one grotesque example. Nearly 40,000 Australians remain abroad, waiting to come home. They've been denied that right. But since September last year, around 2,500 wealthy business people were allowed into the country on innovation and investment visas. For decades, politicians have locked out refugees because opening our borders to them threatens the exclusionary structure of the nation state and the economic and political capital it provides for those in power. Instead of helping people fleeing violence, the Australian government has spent decades funneling billions into cruel mechanisms to discipline and punish asylum seekers. For those trying to escape conflict, this screams, "You are not welcome here." These brutal border policies have normalized the criminalization of statelessness for refugees. Globally, there are over 26 million refugees and 80 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. We cannot forget that Australia has been a participant in imperial violence like the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan that have caused much of this displacement in the first place. Furthermore, Australia's offshore detention policies have forced our Pacific neighbours to bear witness to the cruel and inhumane treatment of refugees. The decisions to hold refugees in offshore detention in Nauru and PNG were made with little or no consultation with the island communities where the detention is taking place. More than 100 Global South countries have requested the TRIPS waiver of intellectual property rights over COVID-19 vaccines. Australia's refusal to sign on to this waiver proposal, currently being considered by the World Trade Organization, is another example of the arbitrary power of borders placing Western capitalist interests over the lives of billions of people. The waiver would promote independence, allowing others to manufacture and distribute their own vaccines and other health materials. Western nations are blocking this because they're more interested in protecting the profits of big pharmaceutical companies and keeping the Global South dependent on them than they are in addressing injustice. Nothing will reveal the exclusionary power of borders more brutally than the unfolding climate crisis. Both the emissions created and the worsening climate disasters that result are cast all across the globe and do not adhere to national borders. When Western industry pollutes at a planetary scale, the consequences are felt first and worst in the Global South. Australia's coal exports have made this country one of the biggest contributors to climate change. However, it is our Pacific neighbours who are being hardest hit by rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and environmental damage. This makes it crucial that we see our world beyond lines on a map. It is Australia's responsibility to provide climate reparations to affected countries and communities. Given Australia's dirty hands in pumping out carbon emissions, we have a responsibility, a special responsibility, to do everything we can for climate justice. The pandemic has shown us the consequences of a total absence of political leadership willing to reject the politics of Fortress Australia. Decades of nationalistic rhetoric like John Howard's "We will decide who comes here" has made many sympathetic to a harsh border regime and more likely to reward border closures at the ballot box. While quarantine has played an important role in keeping case numbers low on this continent, we now need to look beyond national borders and see how we can be strong global citizens. It is time we interrogate the notion of national borders, which have normalized the oppression of millions to the benefit of a few. We must look forward and imagine a world where everyone has a safe place to live and is treated equally, a world which cares for people and for country, no matter what land it is on or where the person is born.
Certainly a reflection that I had is that looking at this whole idea that viruses do or do not discriminate, and I think certainly we've learnt living in this COVID-19 era that viruses nowadays have a real potential to sort of amplify pre-existing issues.
Our media marketing director. Hello.
She said hello.
Well, for me, I really want to go to Indonesia. I did like a summer course.
Hi, my name is Lizzie and I was the delegate during the 2021 Asia Pacific Week conference. I found the conference really thought-provoking and I really loved hearing from both the amazing panelists and all of the other delegates. I really loved getting to know people from across the world and also hearing their stories and hearing about their culture and learning about their traditions, and it was really lovely to be able to have those conversations with people from across the world.
Three, two, one.
But it's really fantastic to be here with you for this conversation. I'm honored to join with the team in terms of acknowledgement of
One of my favorite sessions was on health and environment security in Australia and the Pacific. And I'm so glad to be part of this program.
Sound effects and pyrotechnics. That's what we're going for.
I'll be like, it's just CGI. Fun. Yeah.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, that's what my kitchen is gonna look like tomorrow, actually.
Once you have ever told me a promise that you said will never fade, but then universe's doubt is undeniable by human beings. To be frank, I'm unable, having to see you trapped inside a meaningless summer story. Do I have to? I'm starting to let you go. My wish for being with you can just drift away. Maybe we will reunite in another time, in another life. My soul is feeling disturbed, just like a big wave swept away our world. Yet you are still prioritized. I wish I could hold you for one more time. To be frank, I'm unable, having to see you trapped inside a meaningless summer story. Do I have to? I'm starting to let you go. My wish for being with you can Denganku bersamamu, biarlah menjauh. Mungkin kita akan bertemu lain waktu di alam yang lain waktu di alam yang baru.
Terima kasih.
난 어색함이 너무 싫어 그냥 어째 Baby I know we were special 세상 하나뿐인 special 너의 비워진 그 선물 상자 같은 눈빛 잠무는 듯한 So 너와 나 Yeah I can But it's you You're the one that I want You Everything that I want Blue 내 곁에 내린 blue 모든 게 바뀌어 But it's you 어제 삶은 you 걔는 아름다워 Cause imagination 저 하늘에 우리 집이 마법이 끝이 나기 전에 Cause imagination 차가해 Can you feel the rush? Can you feel the rush? 시간 난 멈춰줘 I wanna stay here 저 세계의 거기서 끝을 너와 나를 남기고파 Come on let's do it I wanna stay here 너는 나만의 special 하나뿐인 내 special 꿈의 문이 열리고 추억 속 내 현실로 So tell me what to do 태양을 멈추고 미소 짓날 뿐이지 Whoa 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 yeah Cause it's you You're the one that I want You Everything that I want Blue 그 순간 모든 널 모든 게 바뀌어 Cause it's you 어제 삶은 you 계속 아름다워 Cause imagination 저 하늘에 우리 집이 마법이 끝이 나기 전에 Imagination 차가해 Can you feel the rush? Can you feel the rush? 시간 난 멈춰줘 I wanna stay here 세계의 거기서 끝을 너와 나를 남기고파 Come on let's do it I wanna stay here 너와만 느끼는 그 시간에 마법 속에 갇히고파 나의 time machine 저무는 놀빛 사실 난 끝이 날 걸 알아 The sun is down 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 저 밤에 네가 사라지기 전 화상 속에 널 눈에 담아 Cause imagination 저 하늘에 우리 집이 마법이 끝이 나기 전에 Imagination 차가해 Can you feel the rush? Can you feel the rush? 시간 난 멈춰줘 I wanna stay here 저 세계의 거기서 끝을 너와 나를 남기고파 I wanna stay here 영원히 그 시간에 마법 속에 갇히고파
Thank you to everyone that contributed to the Delegate Talent Showcase. I know the committee has loved watching the videos come in over the last few days. This brings us to the end of the formal closing ceremony. We now ask that you log on to the final Zoom link provided to you in your email this morning. I will have a couple of closing remarks and thank yous to make, and afterwards we will leave the Zoom link open so you can continue talking to the delegates afterwards. Thank you again.